We meet Norbert Piché, Country Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service, Canada. Hello, Norbert.
Hi, Yves.
On your Facebook page, we can read this sentence: "We are walking by their sides." What does it mean in the context of JRS?
Well, in the context of JRS, to walk by their sides, of refugees, is very significant because it might appear to be something quite simple to walk by the sides of people, but it's difficult. Yes, it's simple, but it's not always easy. And why is that? Well, in a lot of cases, these people come from war-torn countries. They had to flee for their lives. They left family behind. They left their jobs, their houses. They left everything behind, and they find themselves here with practically nothing. And so, to walk by their sides is, sure, it's simple to walk beside somebody and to accompany somebody, but when you start to listen to them, to their stories, their painful stories, oftentimes, that's what's not so easy. And that's when I think we have to look at how are we going to embrace that? How are we going to embrace their suffering? That, to me, is what compassion is all about. Compassion is the meaning of the word is to suffer with, and I think if we are truly to walk with them, if we are truly walking with them, if we are truly accompanying them, we will be suffering with them. We will really have an intimate knowledge of what they are going through. And I think that's what makes the difference. That's the distinction between organizations that are funded by the government, who they are told to keep a distance, a psychological distance from the people that they serve. But I think we are called in our organization, the Jesuit Refugee Service, to walk with them, and then that means to sometimes cross that barrier, if you will, that others impose. And I think that's important, because then we will, at some point, we might realize that we have to embrace our own suffering. We might see things within ourselves as well that are reflected back to us.
Day by day, how do you walk with them? What are you doing? What are the services JRS offered?
Mm-hmm. So the services that we offer, first of all, are the sponsorship services. And so usually what happens is that we have what we call a co-sponsor, somebody who is living here in the Montreal area or maybe outside of Montreal, and who want to sponsor a family member who is a refugee abroad. And why do they come in to see us? Well, they don't necessarily have the means to sponsor by themselves, and so that's why they come to see us. And so we will help them not only with all of the application forms, but we will explain to them, well, this is what's going to happen. And you have to prepare yourself to be able to welcome that person when he or she arrives here. And so there's a whole process that needs to be put in place with that co-sponsor, so that he or she is well prepared to sponsor, to receive, to welcome the refugee once the refugee arrives here. And that takes a lot of time. And once, I mean, it can take a few years before the refugee arrives here.
Oh, really?
Yes, with all the paperwork that needs to be done, and there's only a certain amount of people that are accepted every year. It can take several years. And so during that time, the co-sponsor and ourselves are in contact with the refugee. And then when the refugee finally arrives here, then we will accompany the co-sponsor to the airport, welcome the refugee. It's always a happy moment at the airport. Obviously, with the pandemic, all of that has been kind of put on hold. There's very few families that have been arriving. However, in normal times, we would accompany and welcome the refugee once they arrive, and then we help the co-sponsor in all those first things that they need to do, such as acquiring the medical card for the refugee, going to registering them for French classes if need be, all those kinds of things. And we ourselves will have direct contact with the refugee to make sure that everything is okay. We usually would visit them in normal times, a few weeks after their arrival, and then later on as well. But right now we contact them by phone or via Zoom. And another one of the things that we are presently doing, that we've done in the past, is have conversation circles with the refugees. They are usually registered with the government classes, and these groups, these conversation groups, help them to practice their French. And so therefore, they are better equipped to integrate into Quebec society. We usually would also have workshops to help them with certain things that they might not understand, such as the equivalency of their diplomas or their degrees. So those are the kinds of practical things that we do with the refugees, and we're hoping to do other things in the future as well.
During the 40 years, because sponsorship start about 1980, 81 here, so it is 40 years, and the sponsorship program was one of the most important thing about the Jesuit Refugee Service in Canada. But education and advocacy are very important, and especially in our times. What can you tell us about your works about those two subjects?
Mm-hmm. Yes. One of the things that we thought was very important was raising awareness about refugee issues. And we started to think about, well, what can we do? And this was a number of years ago. And one of the things that we came up with was a simulation exercise, which was inspired by the blanket exercise, which comes from the organization called Kairos, and that talks about uh, the, the 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 Native Americans here and their lives, and it helps people understand what they've gone through. And so, inspired by that, we decided, well, let's try to do something similar so that people have a better idea of what a refugee has to go through. Um, so, so this simulation exercise called a Journey into Exile does exactly that. It gives people an idea what a refugee goes through. They themselves become refugees, so they have to live, even albeit just for an hour or so. Uh, they get a chance to really experience what a refugee goes through. And so by doing that, that helps people better understand what a refugee goes through, and then it it allows them to kind of ask, well, what can we do about it? Okay. And once they are at that point, then it's kind of like, well, okay, now what do we do? Well, can we get a better idea of why there are refugees in the world today? Um, is it maybe because of some Canadian mining companies that are operating in different parts of the world that are causing refugees? Is it because of climate change? What are our actions or inactions? Or what are we doing or not doing that are creating the circumstances that create refugees? And so it gets people to think. And I think that's what is crucial here, is to get people to reflect and to see, okay, this is what's happening. These are what refugees are going through, and what can I do about it?
In the news, we can hear or read a lot about immigration, refugees, but not in a good way, if I can say. Uh, New laws, regulations. It seems to be a difficult time for the organization like JRS. But it seems we maybe forget a little bit the persons, the human factor. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a very good point. Like we in terms of, we need to always remember the human factor, the person that's there in front of us. Because otherwise, yeah, there's all these people, we refer to them as great numbers, waves of people that are coming, but that kind of clouds the fact that there are individuals here, and each one has his or her own story, just like us. Um, and so it's easy to set up regulations, to enact laws, to prevent the great numbers, the waves, and all that. Um, and I think what we need to do instead of that is to keep in mind that there's always an individual with his or her story there. Um, that person is left for a reason. That person is not didn't just decide to pick up for no reason, to pick up and leave. There's a very good reason for that departure, and throughout human history, people have been on the move. There's always been people on the move, and it's only recently in the last few centuries that with our whole notion of nation state and putting up borders and all of this kind of stuff, that we have decided that there are some people that are going to be in and some people that are going to be out. And I think we need to rethink that, because we have human beings that are going through very difficult situations. These people flee because of the climate, because of war-torn areas, because of the activities of mining companies, because of gang warfare, all kinds of reasons. And if we close our borders to these people, we are creating more and more human misery. And I think that we have a responsibility as part of this human family to consider what the other person is going through, and to try to put ourselves in that person's shoes. And I think it brings me back to what the Pope says, that no one should be forgotten, because he's thinking about that individual. He's not thinking about the waves. And I think that's the thing that we need to remind ourselves, that everybody must be included. Nobody must be forgotten.
Maybe it can be our wish for this anniversary, that no one must be forgotten.
Yes, very much so. No one should be forgotten. That's the wish.
Norbert Piché, Country Director of JRS-Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves.